Okay everybody, hey, T. Joe back again. In my last video, I talked about how to make money through refinancing. Okay, and I got a lot of questions on what rate do I pick, and if I take the credit, yeah, I might make money in the short term, but don't I lose money overall in the long term? I'm going to answer that question right now. Also, my last video, some of the lender credits got cut off, and so hopefully this time it will be a little bit more clear. So as I said, the most important thing when refinancing is to know that every single rate that is offered will also have a credit, a lender's credit attached to it. A lot of times when we go and refinance, we ask, oh, what's the rate? Well, the fact is that there are many rates. There's a rate at, say, 3.125, there's a rate at 3.25, there's a rate at 3.375, and each of these rates have a different lender credit attached to it. So here's a potential breakdown. Taking a $400,000 mortgage, you can see that we have several rates here, and I just pulled this off of amerisave.com, and you can go to any lender. It's not like Amerisave and they don't list it out. You can ask any lender what their rates are and what credits are associated with it. Sometimes they don't actually list it out as specific dollar amount. Sometimes they list it out as points. So for example, if you wanted a certain rate, you can buy it down for 1 point or 0.5 points or 1.5 points. So 1 point basically just means 1% of the loan amount. For a $400,000 mortgage, if you wanted to buy it down for 1 point, it means that you would have to pay $4,000. If you wanted to buy it down for 0.5 points, it would be $2,000. And if you want to go up a rate, they might give you a 0.5 or a 1 point credit, which is like $4,000 credit. So in this case, you can see that I have the different rates and I listed it out. And you can see that start off at a 3.125% rate, the payment is $17.14 a month. Now, if you go up the next rate, each payment is going to increase by about $27 to $28 a month. And if you go to the next column over, you'll see the credit. So what that means is if I took the 3.125% rate, I would pay $3,700 for a credit. I would have to pay the lender $3,700 on top of my closing costs, and closing costs are generally $2,000 to $3,000. So I would have to pay $6,000 basically to get that loan. But you can see if you go down and if you take the 3.5% rate, there is a negative credit. What that means is that the lender pays you. So the lender would pay you $8,000. So what happens is that a lot of people have been asking from my previous video, what is the deal here? Is it better to take this upfront cash? But the question is, do I lose money over time? My whole goal is just to educate you to know that there is a credit associated with each rate, and it's really up to you to make your own calculations to see whether or not it makes sense for you. So what I did is that if you go online, you can go to any amortization type of calculator and you can type in your rate and your loan amount, and they'll give you the total interest that you'll pay over time. So you look at the best rate there, 3.125, you're gonna pay a total interest over 30 years of $216,000. And while that sounds bad, that's just the case. That's how it works. But if you go down each incremental eighth of a point, you'll see that over the 30 years, you'll pay an extra $10,000 approximately. So by the time you get to the 3.5% rate, you'll see that you'll pay a total interest amount of $246,000. Okay, so here's the question. Does it make sense to take a credit up front versus paying a higher rate? My question that I would ask myself and I would ask everybody else is, how long do you think you'll stay in your home, number one? Number two is, will you refinance anytime soon? Because let's take the 3.125% rate, which is the best rate. If I were to take the next rate up instead of that one, I would get an extra $5,000, right? Because with the 3.125% rate, I would be paying $3,700. With the 3.25% rate, I would be getting back $2,000. So that's a $5,700 difference. So what does that mean? That means that with the $27 savings per month, it would take me 214 months to make back what I would have saved, which is $5,700. So if I could make $5,700 versus trying to stay in my rate for 214 months, it makes sense to me that it's more of a risk for me to stay in this loan for 214 months than to take the $5,700 up front, because there's a good chance that I might refinance pretty soon, especially if rates are dropping or even if rates stay the same. I might refinance again just because I know now that my rate can actually give me a credit. Okay, if I were to take the next rate up, the 3.375% rate, I would get a credit back of $5,347. There's a difference there, next rate down, of $3,300. With the savings of $27 a month, if I took the lower rate, it would take me 120 months to make back that savings of $3,300. If I go down one more rate, 3.5%, I'll actually make an extra $2,700, right, in terms of credit. That would take me 95 months to make up if I were to take the lower rate. So basically, for me, I would pick the 3.5% rate, take the highest credit of $8,000, and the risk to me is just whether or not I would stay in this mortgage for 95 months. There's a good chance that I'm gonna refinance in the next 4 months or maybe 6 months. So that's the calculation that I encourage everybody to make, and you really need to figure it out for yourself. So, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. The whole point of this is that you're more informed and you understand that each rate has a credit associated with it. And your whole goal, I'm guessing, is to save money by refinancing. So if you're really gonna save money, you really need to calculate out your risk of taking a lower rate, because there's a good chance that you might not stay in that rate for that long. The bank would rather you take the risk over time and pay them up front. That's one thing. Or you can get paid up front and have the bank take the risk over time, which is, to see how long you'll stay in that mortgage. And it really depends on, how rates go. Now, another thing I wanted to teach you is how to really get the most out of your closing costs. I mentioned in my other video that picking the correct credit is really important, because you can actually only make $2,000 on top of your closing costs. So for example, most closing costs are only $2,000. So it would make sense to pick credit is around $4,000, because that's pretty much the maximum. You would have that credit pay for your $2,000 closing costs, and then you would get $2,000 on top of your closing costs back in the form of a check. So for example, in this one here, if you picked the 3.25 rate, your credit of $2,000 would probably just cover your closing costs, and you might get $87 back. So if I was in this situation, I would pick the 3.375% rate, and I would take the credit of $5,300 because it would cover my closing cost of $2,000. I would get $2,000 back in a form of check, and the rest of it might go to the lender. So that's kind of how it might work. Now, another thing to know is that sometimes there might be extra things that are involved in your closing costs. So a typical closing cost will be things like appraisal fee, courier service, title, any type of fees. Your lender might make some money off of this, and all that is part of your closing costs. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you can actually have other things added onto your closing costs, and there's a benefit there, because if those are things that you have to pay for anyway, you would want the credit to pay for it. So for example, I'm doing a refinance right now. My typical closing costs are there. It's about $2,000. But the lender is also wanting my taxes, half of the year of my taxes, to be involved in my closing costs. So that's around $4,000 that's going to be tacked on to my closing costs. The reason is because the taxes are due in November. Because we're doing this loan 60 days from when taxes are due, the lender wants to be able to collect this tax up front so that they have less risk and know that this property is going to have their taxes paid off, and there's not going to be any liens on it. Essentially, they own a big portion of this property, right? Because I have a loan with them. So they want the taxes to be paid off. Another thing that they're adding into my closing cost is 1 month of my principal and interest. So for example, my principal and interest is around $2,200. That's included in my closing costs. So right now, my closing costs are $2,000, $4,000, which is half of the year of my taxes, plus another $2,000, which is 1 month of my principal and interest. So which rate did I pick? I picked a rate with a credit of $10,000. Why did I do that? Because I have a closing cost that costs $8,000. So I'm going to pick a $10,000 credit. $8,000 will be paid off from that credit, and $2,000 will come back to me in the form of a check. But get this, in that closing cost, were costs that I would have to pay for anyway. For example, my taxes, $4,000, and a month of my principal and interest, so that's $2,000. So essentially, just from doing this refinance, I pocketed $8,000. That's really good news. I really encourage everybody to look into it and just calculate for yourself which is the best rate and which credit works for you. That's my particular strategy. And if rates continue to drop or not, I hope to refinance as soon as possible. So, oh yeah, anyways. So thanks a lot.